Hi, it's Katrina. Get ready for an underwater adventure from lost treasure to bombs that could explode at any moment. Here are some incredible discoveries made underwater. So hit that subscribe button and let's go. Happy God of the Nile. When it comes to amazing artifacts pulled from the depths of the Mediterranean, the lost city of Thonis Heraklion takes the cake. This ancient city, once a bustling port that thrived even before Alexandria was founded in 331 BC, was once a place of glory. Even if you already know about this city, you might not know what I'm about to tell you. Every ship coming from Greece stopped in Thonis Heraklion because it was the port of entry to Egypt. As a port city, Thonis Heraklion grew filthy rich. With wealth came religious importance, as the city had enough money to build the monumental Temple of Amun. 2,500 years ago, Thonis Heraklion was the Egyptian equivalent of Vatican City. Then it was lost, swallowed by the sea, and annihilated. It lasted from the 8th century BC to the 8th century AD, a respectable 1,000 years. Nobody saw it again until the year 2000, when French archaeologist Frank Gaudiot uncovered it. And just in time, too. The city's name had just about been scrubbed from the collective memory of humanity. Very little about the city remains in any ancient writing, but there is one example that can shed some light on just how important the city was. In the 5th century BC, Greek historian Herodotus wrote of a grand temple built in Egypt to rival all the temples of the world. He also wrote that Helen of Troy visited Thonis Heraklion with her secret lover Paris before the two of them helped start the Trojan War. Some have suggested that Cleopatra herself could be buried somewhere within the ruins. The main issues archaeologists face right now is that the city is enormous and it's completely submerged. It's a couple miles from the coastline, between 30 and 40 feet deep in Abu Qir Bay. It's also vast, covering a huge area, and its buildings are so effectively destroyed that digging through them is costly. Even with so many challenges, archaeologists take it in stride. They pull one artifact at a time up from the murky depths. In the last 24 years, coins, ritual objects, and colossal statues have been pulled from the city. Over 700 ancient anchors have been identified, along with the haunting wreckage of 79 ships. But there is so much more, all of it just waiting to be brought to the surface. One of my favorite discoveries is the giant head of Hapi, the god Hapi. At least archaeologists think it's Hapi's head. Here's a photo of the massive structure being brought to the surface, taken by Christoph Garrick. The statue is made of red granite, originally standing almost 20 feet tall. If you like big heads, here's another snapshot of a colossal noggin. This one belongs to an unknown pharaoh. The image also taken by Christoph Garrick. The reason I like the head of Hapi so much is that Hapi was a fascinating Egyptian deity. He was the god of the Nile's annual flood. He wasn't technically the god of the Nile, only of its flood. The Egyptians were very specific about their gods. He was sometimes called Lord of the River Bringing Vegetation. This might seem strange, but it does make sense. Each year, when the Nile flooded, the flood deposited rich soil all along the banks. This allowed the Egyptians to grow a multitude of crops, thereby feeding their people. The god Hapi was directly responsible for whether or not Egyptians had dinner on their plates. Of course they worshipped him. A drowned world exposed. On June 6, 2023, Ukraine's Kakhovka dam was destroyed as part of the Russian-Ukraine conflict. It was a major disaster. The dam unleashed torrents of rampaging water, draining the reservoir and causing unprecedented flooding. It was a humanitarian tragedy. It was also a boon for seekers of treasure. Take a look at these satellite images from Planet Labs PVC. The upper image is from June 5th, showing the reservoir as it was. The bottom image is from June 13th, showing the reservoir practically empty. This is what happens when a dam bursts. The water dropped more than 16 feet. Soon, people began illegally collecting artifacts for sale. These fortune seekers are known in the archaeology community as black archaeologists. Whatever they find typically ends up on the black market. I don't think that's quite politically correct, but that's the term for right now. One of the first discoveries reported was a skull with a Nazi helmet, but that was only the start. The Kakhovka Dam was built by the Soviet Union to prevent uncontrolled flooding and improve transportation. In 1956, construction was complete and a humongous area was flooded. The flood wiped away villages, churches, and a place known as the Cossack Atlantis. The lands had been home to the ancient steppe warriors, the Zaporizhian Cossacks. Nobody knows when the original Cossack community started to form in Ukraine. It was likely around the 12th century AD. Then, by the 15th century, they had become a force to be reckoned with. The Cossacks were a major political entity at the very heart of Ukraine's post-medieval history. They were also a powerful military force that were not to be messed with. The Tsardom of Russia didn't mess with them, and neither did the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth or the Crimean Khanate. I know you may not have heard of all of these groups before. The basic thing to know is that the Zaporizhian Cossacks dominated Ukraine, right up until a series of conflicts and poor alliances resulted in them being disbanded by the Russian Empire in the 18th century. Then, with the building of the Kakhovka Dam, a huge portion of their history was flooded. The Ukrainian government has already started figuring out how to rebuild the dam. In the meantime, people will keep finding goodies. Somebody has already discovered a wooden boat from 500 years ago. Who knows what will be next? And now for number 12. But first, it's shout-out time! I want to give a huge thank you to Buffalo Hawk for the generous super thanks. We wouldn't be here without you. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already to join the Origins Explained family. Munitions from World War II. You're not going to believe where a huge pile of munitions from World War II was just discovered. Get ready for a literal blast from the past. Bombs, submarine weapons, smoke devices, and plenty of bullets. These munitions were found off the coast of Los Angeles. I bet you didn't know the ocean floor outside the City of Angels is riddled with explosives. The discovery was just made by the Scripps Institution of Oceanography at the University of California. Their scientists did a survey of the coastline along LA using sonar, video cameras, and deep water vehicles. They were shocked to find multiple dump sites with unexploded bombs and munitions. They weren't even looking for munitions. Eric Terrell from the investigative team said they were looking for the remains of barrels that were used to dump chemical waste decades ago, as recently as the 1970s. Not many people know that the seafloor just south of Los Angeles was used as an industrial waste dump site starting in the 1930s. There are tens of thousands of barrels scattered across the bottom of the ocean, most of them filled with chemical waste. I can even tell you one specific chemical, DDT. The pesticide so dangerous it's banned. And while I hate to be a downer, you have to hear about the sea lion. Scientists have confirmed adult sea lions around California have a high rate of cancer. Scientists also connected the cancer to DDT, the pesticide banned in 1972. It was banned because of the damage it was doing to the ecosystems. It killed everything. So, ironically, American companies dumped it into the ocean. And now the seals have cancer. As for those munitions just discovered, they litter the ocean floor between Catalina Island and Long Beach. The research team used sonar to map 135 square miles, finding boxes of munitions, Mark 9 depth charges, and Mark 1 smoke floats. Now it's the Navy's job to determine what they're going to do about the problem. They might pull the munitions up, disposing of them in a more environmentally friendly way, or they might leave them where they are, 3,000 feet deep. Before moving on, I'll leave you with this image. It's a crab scuttling on the seafloor off the coast of California, right next to a package of munitions. The picture was taken by the Scripps Institution of Oceanography's remotely operated vehicle in 2023, so just last year. The warrior with a mustache. When archaeologists raised part of a 17th century shipwreck from the English Channel, they were greeted with a bizarre face. On the rudder section of the old Dutch trading ship, somebody had carved the huge head of a warrior with a mighty mustache. He's quite the character. Let me back it up a bit and give you the full story. 400 years ago, a mysterious Dutch trading ship sank off the coast of Dorset. It was accidentally discovered in the early 2000s by a dredger. 6 years of underwater investigations followed. In the end, the experts agreed it was time to raise as much as they could from Davy Jones's locker. This was no easy task. The merchant vessel was 130 feet long. laying at the bottom of the sea, but they didn't need all of it. In fact, there was no way they were getting the whole thing. The marine archaeologists mostly wanted to recover some of the beautiful carvings that covered the boat. The ship was decked out. It had an enormous mural-like carving along its stern, depicting characters from myth like mermen, their eye sockets bedazzled with precious stones. Archaeologists suspect this was one of the most lavishly decorated boats that ever sailed the seven seas. Almost every inch of it had been expertly carved. The stern was too big and heavy to recover. The archaeological team from English Heritage managed to earn themselves a grant of just over $500,000. It was enough money to salvage the wooden rudder with the mustached warrior on it. The rudder had become separated from the main hull, making it easier to pick up off the bottom of the ocean. Nobody knows who the mustached warrior was. Nobody even knows what happened to the ship. The experts call it the Swash Channel wreck because they can't figure out its name. Tests of the wood show it was built around 1628. The wood came from a forest along the Dutch-German border, and that's pretty much all the info they have. The mustached warrior is currently on display at the Poole Museum in Dorset. Gods and coins from ancient Rome. Archaeologists have called it the biggest discovery in 30 years, and it was all thanks to a pair of recreational divers in Israel. Ran Feinstein and Ofer Ranan were diving inside the ancient Roman port of Caesarea when they found the bones of an ancient merchant ship. I don't know what you find when you go diving, but I hope it's as exciting as these guys. Ran and Ofer found an actual ship that hadn't been seen by human eyes in 1,600 years. They reported their discovery to the Israel Antiquities Authority, who sent their own professional divers to the site. And this was where things got interesting. A large portion of the seabed had been cleared by the ocean currents, like a big invisible broom sweeping away the debris. This left the remnants of the merchant ship sitting at the top of the sand. Divers with the IAA have already brought a ton of artifacts to the surface. These artifacts are awesome. How much money would you pay for an authentic statue of the moon goddess Luna? Or what about a bronze lamp depicting the Roman sun god Sol? At least a few bucks, right? Archaeologists also pulled up statues of animal figures, like a wild boar with a swan perched on its head, and they found two huge clumps of metal, each one weighing 45 pounds. The metallic clumps turned out to be money. Each huge clump is made of thousands of coins that fused together from centuries in the water. Jacob Sharvett with the Marine Archaeology Unit said a marine assemblage of treasure like this hasn't been found in Israel in 3 decades. Because the statues were buried in sand, they were protected. They look as if they were cast just yesterday. But where did all of this stuff come from? The treasure was on a merchant ship delivering goods from one port to another when it wrecked, perhaps taking the whole crew with it. There are thousands of these types of shipwrecks spread across the seas of Rome's old territory. The coins have the face of Emperor Constantine on them, so it was easy to date them to his rule between 312 and 337 AD. Constantine was one of the most important emperors in Roman history. He was the one who turned the empire into an official Christian state, jump-starting the spread of Christianity. The God of Luck. I'd like to introduce you to a god that I'm almost positive you've never heard of before. He's not Roman, he's not Greek, he's not even in the Bible. His name is Ebisu, the jolly Japanese god of fishermen and good luck. In 1988, a nearly life-size statue of Ebisu was erected above Kesennuma Bay. He quickly became an auspicious symbol in Japan, attracting tourists while locals believed he would bring luck to their fishermen. Ebisu stood vigilant over the bay until the devastating tsunami of 2011. The floodwater washed Ebisu away. The god of luck wasn't so lucky. Then again, maybe he is lucky, because once more he will be overlooking Kesennuma Bay. In November 2019, a diver conducting an underwater survey for a reconstruction project happened upon Ebisu stuck in his watery grave. Take a look at him in this picture, courtesy of Kesennuma City. This was where the statue ended up after the tsunami, trapped in murk and gloom for 8 years. Ebisu was promptly salvaged by a crane and brought to the surface. He was surprisingly undamaged, other than his broken fishing rod. Local priests of the Isuzu shrine, Masashi Kamiyama, said the recovery of the statue gives hope to the people devastated by the 2011 tsunami. Ebisu is due to be cleaned up a bit and then installed near his original position, where he will once more grant luck to fishermen and sailors. On your next visit to Kesanuma, be sure to drop by and say hi. Explosive reminders of the Civil War. On February 17, 1865, the mayor of Columbia surrendered and the Confederate forces retreated. What happened after that is typically left out of the history books. The Union soldiers got wasted, then started ransacking the city, so drunk they could barely see. By the end of the party, more than 2/3 of Columbia had burned to the ground. This was an episode of the American Civil War, a piece of history that recently came back into public view thanks to some treasures discovered at the bottom of South Carolina's Congaree River. During a project to clean up the river, workers found 10-inch cannonballs, artillery shells, and many other Civil War weapons that have been in the river since 1865. Most of the weapons came from the Confederate forces. After the city of Columbia was occupied under the leadership of General William Tecumseh Sherman, the Union soldiers threw thousands of Confederate weapons into the river and their supplies. They threw away sabers, bayonets, ball cartridges, and gunpowder. Archaeologists have always known this stuff was hiding in the river, but they didn't have the funds or the resources to recover them until now. The cleanup effort began in June 2022. The crew has to use armor-plated excavators just in case they accidentally trigger a Civil War bomb. A mysterious medieval helmet. A helmet was found at the bottom of the sea just off the coast of Sicily this year, 2024. I don't think you'll be able to fit it on your head though because it suffered a bit of damage. The medieval piece of headgear is encrusted with bits of sea gunk. It wouldn't offer much protection these days. The helmet came as an interesting find because nothing else was found with it. Experts aren't sure if it was part of a shipwreck or if a soldier accidentally dropped their helmet off the side of a boat. It's a one-off artifact from the Italian Renaissance. Just a random helmet with a story that I would love to know. The only thing researchers from the Superintendency of the Sea said is that the helmet likely belonged to an infantryman during the late medieval period or the early Renaissance. Judging by the crest at its top, researchers believe the helmet is a capucet, likely belonging to a soldier from Spain or Portugal. Sadly, that's all the information I can give you. I know, it's a bummer. Divers are planning a return to the site where the helmet was found to do a more thorough investigation, so be sure to watch all of the next videos on watery discoveries for updates. If a shipwreck is found, you'll be hearing about it from me right away. Queen Anne's Revenge. How many artifacts do you think have been recovered from Blackbeard's ship? I'm going to throw a number at you and it's going to be shocking. Since the first dive down to the spooky remains of the great pirate sunken vessel in 1997, over 400,000 artifacts have been raised. That's a lot of artifacts. Archaeologists have pulled up 24 cannons, anchors, a grapnel, tools, glass trade beads, parts of the ship itself, cannonballs, fragments of pottery, the list goes on. Here's a picture of Blackbeard's anchor by Robert Willett. If you're new to Blackbeard, this is going to be exciting. The ship I'm talking about is Queen Anne's Revenge, which ran aground near Beaufort in North Carolina 306 years ago in 1718. All these centuries later, Blackbeard is still the most famous pirate captain in history. Let's dig a little deeper into the history of his ship and of Blackbeard himself. I think you'll be surprised at what we find. Historians generally agree that Blackbeard was not quite as ferocious as the legends made him out to be. Blackbeard, real name Edward Teach, understood the power of his image. He dressed completely in black. When he boarded an enemy ship, he put lit fuses, or slow matches, in his hair and beard so that he was shrouded in a fog, looking like a demon within a hellish aura of sulfur. These kinds of tactics helped Blackbeard become notorious. Almost nothing is known about his early life. He showed up on the pirating scene in 1716, a crew member working under Captain Benjamin Hornigold. He rose through the ranks quickly, earning himself his own ship. Then when Hornigold retired from being a pirate in 1717, Edward was left with the reins to the pirate kingdom of the West Indies. That year, Blackbeard captured a French slave ship called La Concorde. He renamed the ship Queen Anne's Revenge. loaded her with 40 guns, and went about his vicious pirate business. He formed a sort of pirate conglomerate, including other famous renegades like Stede Bonnet. Together, they blockaded the Charleston port and ransomed everybody in the town. This sounds like it occurred over a long period, but it all happened in 1717. He ran his ship aground on a sandbar and fled to Bath, North Carolina, where he accepted a royal pardon. Blackbeard could have stopped being a pirate right there and then. He could have lived a long, wealthy life. But he went back to the sea, where he was captured in November of 1718 and killed. If you want to learn more about Blackbeard, I highly suggest visiting the North Carolina Maritime Museum in Beaufort, where you can physically see the artifacts from Queen Anne's Revenge. Trawling for bombs. The crew of the Ticino trawling vessel shared a moment of unbridled terror when they accidentally pulled in an unexploded bomb from World War II. In the trawler's net was a humongous explosive weighing an astonishing 1,000 pounds. It was 3 feet long, likely jettisoned by a bomber with the Royal Air Force in the 1940s. Luckily, nobody was hurt. The crew immediately alerted the Coast Guard that they had a bomb. The British Navy bomb disposal unit was sent from the Clyde Naval Base, and the experts confirmed the explosive to be of British origin. They also quickly got rid of it. They dropped the bomb into deep waters about a mile from shore and then detonated it when the coast was clear. Let's just hope the explosion didn't take out any unwitting sea creatures. The whole ordeal was something of a nightmare for the trawler's crew. When they first hauled in the net, they thought it was filled with 1,000 pounds of fish, not 1,000 pounds of exploding doom. New species in Utah. Scientists have found a tiny worm living underwater. This small, slippery, and a little yucky discovery could change the current understanding of Utah's most famous lake. The Great Salt Lake is a big, salty lake in Utah, a body of water 950 square miles. Scientists from the University of Utah wanted to learn what kinds of creatures can live in such a salty environment. They already knew about the lake's brine shrimp and flies, but they wanted to find more. The first step was to sift through sediment deposits. Sure enough, they hit the jackpot. Scientists found tiny worms known as nematodes. It came as a bit of a shock because it was believed the nematodes of Utah's Great Salt Lake had gone extinct in 1985. That was the year the lake bed shrank significantly, exposing the worms to air and wiping them out. Or so everyone thought. Scientists have now found thousands of microscopic worms living inside the rocks and sediment of the lake, even as it shrinks to record low levels. This is impressive because the lake is about 9 times saltier than the ocean. It's basically a giant bowl of salt, so anything that manages to live inside of it is miraculous. This discovery is important because it challenges our current perception of where life can live. Researchers think that in time, studying the ecosystem of the Great Salt Lake could shed light on how alien organisms might survive on planets like Mars. Guns and coins from the Franklin expedition. I can't think of a more terrifying expedition than the Franklin expedition. But if you can, when you're done hearing what I have to say, be sure to let me know in the comments. The Franklin expedition began in 1845. A group of sailors led by courageous Captain Sir John Franklin went in search of the Northwest Passage. The crews were spread across 2 ships, the HMS Erebus and the HMS Terror. Not a single one of the 129 men who ventured into the frigid waters of Canada survived. It was one of the most hopeless expeditions in human history. There's something inherently frightening about what happened to the ships. Maybe that's why so many books have been written about their fate. 2 centuries after the ship sank in 2014, Canadian divers found the wreckage. Since then, Parks Canada and the Natilik Heritage Society have been busy pulling artifacts out of the water. In September 2023, underwater archaeologists conducted 68 dives. They discovered a chest, pistols, military equipment, coins, and medicinal bottles. They also found random objects like a leather shoe, some science equipment, a thermometer, and even a fishing rod. All these awesome relics were brought to the surface and will hopefully be put on display, either in Canada or in Britain. Here's a snapshot of archaeologist Marc-André Bernier poking through the ancient chest inside the Erebus. The image is thanks to Brett Seymour of Parks Canada. I want to really dig into the spookiness of what happened to these 2 ships. But it's tricky because nobody knows precisely what happened. Most of the information available comes from Inuit oral histories. That's another part of what makes the disaster so intriguing. Only Canadian folklore speaks of what happened. The two ships got stuck in the ice off the coast of Beechey Island in 1845. They managed to break free in 1846. They continued their journey but got stuck in ice again on the tip of King William Island, also Nunavut. What followed were 2 years of misery. It was hard enough to stay home for 2 years during COVID. How would you feel about staying on a frozen boat in the middle of the Arctic for 2 years? No electricity, no TikTok, and nothing but smelly sailors to keep you company. They finally abandoned ship on April 22, 1848, then tried to walk to safety. None of them made it. It's believed they resorted to cannibalism. But since nobody survived to tell the tale, the particulars of their hardship remain a mystery. Only the Inuit people who came across the remains had any idea what those men had faced. The missing Ming treasure. There is a treasure hunt unfolding in China right now that is so epic they should make a Netflix documentary about it. It's a treasure hunt that could lead to the discovery of an astonishing amount of wealth. The hunt is taking place at the confluence of the Min River and the Jin River, where an ambush saw a peasant warlord be brought to ruin. Legend has it that in the 17th century, Zhang Xianzhong rose to power from a lowly peasant to a bloodthirsty baron. After pillaging small fiefdoms across the region, he was traveling upriver with his entire treasury when he was ambushed. Supreme commander of the Ming Dynasty's army, Yang Zhan, attacked the peasant warlord and claimed total victory. The warlord's whole fleet was sent to the bottom of where the two rivers meet, along with thousands of his soldiers. This went down right next to the town of Jiangku. I should mention that these rivers are deep and fast. Within minutes, the wreckage of the warlord's ships had already started floating away with the current. But that hasn't stopped people like peasants and archaeologists and anyone with a net from searching the river for the lost treasure. Now, it's been found. Archaeologists with the Sichuan Provincial Institute of Archaeology and Cultural Relics dammed part of the Min River, allowing them unprecedented access to 250 acres of relatively dry riverbed. They were able to pick up treasures like you might pick up sand dollars on the beach. They've already uncovered more than 70,000 artifacts. The team has collected pieces of silver, gold, symbols of office, and scraps of military equipment. All the treasure points to Zhang's failed effort to start a new dynasty. He had needed all of that treasure he stole to buy his legitimacy as a ruler, but the ambush sent Zhang's treasure and his hopes to a watery grave. The Danish Beast of the Deep. King Hans of Denmark ruled his nation from 1481 to 1513. During his reign, it's believed he had a powerful flagship built to lead his fleet. It was called the Gribsjunden. Amazingly, a piece of the flagship was recently pulled out of the water in Sweden. It's believed the Gribsjunden was carrying King Hans to Sweden for a diplomatic mission in 1495. But just before Hans made it ashore, the ship caught fire. Hans watched his favorite warship burn from a nearby escape boat. It was such a disaster, leaving the king in such a foul mood, that he called off the mission. He didn't show up, and the Swedes were furious. Soon after, war broke out between the two countries. Historians often wonder how different things might have been if the Gribsjunden hadn't caught fire. If the diplomatic mission had been a success, maybe the war between Sweden and Denmark would have never happened. But it did, and nothing can change that. Now, all these years later, Swedish divers have started salvaging the remnants of the warship. It was originally found in the 1970s. The salvaging eddy part of it was a pipe dream. Now, with a bit more funding and better technology, divers have saved a wooden figurehead depicting a dog-like monster. It's most likely a beast from mythology, but nobody can identify it. The figurehead is one of the oldest preserved wood carvings of its kind. It's also rare. Marcus Sandkeger from the local museum said the figurehead is likely the only one left from a 15th century ship on the planet. Even after 520 years submerged, it's in excellent shape. Thanks for watching! Which amazing discovery did you like hearing about the most? Let me know in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already and stick around for an older video you might have missed. Bye for now.
The SS Thistlegorm. The SS Thistlegorm was one of the greatest steamships the world has ever seen, and remains one of the most fascinating shipwrecks from World War II. However, most people have never even heard of this ship before. It began its life in April of 1940 as a British armed merchant navy steamship. It was named Thistle after the national flower of Scotland, and Gorm after the Gaelic word for blue. Sadly, this enormous vessel wouldn't survive active service longer than a year. It went on 3 voyages across the Atlantic Ocean before meeting its match during the 4th. The Thistlegorm was on its way from Glasgow in Scotland to Alexandria in Egypt when on October 6, 1941, the Germans attacked. A pair of Heinkel 111 aircraft from the German Luftwaffe were dispatched from Crete, which at the time was occupied by the Axis forces. The only goal of the pilots was to destroy something, and they succeeded. The aircraft dropped 2 bombs, which sank the vessel nearly instantaneously. 4 sailors were blown to pieces, and 5 members of the Royal Navy gun crew were lost. These days, the wreckage of the SS Thistlegorm is still sitting at the bottom of the ocean. Near its ruined hull, you can find the remains of the ship's cargo. She had been carrying steam locomotives for the Egyptian National Railways when she was blown up. They ended up being buried on the bottom of the ocean, right there with the ship. Tanks from D-Day. Off the coast of England, divers discovered a lost host of tanks sitting at the bottom of the ocean. These ruined army vehicles may not look so interesting now covered in sea slime, but they once prevented a massive disaster from occurring on D-Day. If it hadn't been for the destruction and sinking of these tanks, thousands more soldiers may have died needlessly when the Allies stormed the beaches. It could have been such a blunder that the day turned out differently. These underwater tanks were used during Operation Smash, a training exercise on Dorset Beach in April of 1944. Soldiers were preparing for the Normandy landings. During the drill, it was important for military tacticians to learn what would happen when tanks were launched in shallow water. They learned the hard way that it's not a good idea. 32 tanks were launched during the training. 7 of them sank and 6 people were killed. What it showed is that when you launch a tank from a boat in water too deep, the tank simply sinks and the soldiers inside of it die. This hard lesson is now preserved off Dorset Beach, where the tanks remain today in their watery grave. Wreckage in the Mississippi. Near downtown St. Louis, Missouri, a ship from World War II called the USS Inaugural sank back in August of 1993. The ship was moored near the Gateway Arch, but accidentally got separated from its moorings in the Mississippi River. The ship drifted off downstream, turned on its side, and then sank near the Poplar Street Bridge. The sinking ship was a pretty big story in 1993. But people quickly lost interest. After a little while, locals completely forgot there was a World War II ship down there. They weren't reminded until last summer, when the Mississippi River reached historic lows. The water dropped to just 3.8 feet, revealing the busted vessel at the bottom of the river for the first time in 3 decades. The USS Inaugural was launched on the 1st of October in 1944. It was decommissioned just 2 years later in 1946. It participated in the invasion of Okinawa, then continued minesweeping operations in the waters around Japan and Korea. The Inaugural cleared 82 mines during its service, even being awarded 2 battle stars. It was ultimately relocated to St. Louis in 1968 to be a floating museum. The ship became a National Historic Landmark, but then lost its designation after the sinking. It looks like the government didn't think the ship deserved to be on the National Historic Landmark list, considering it was underwater. Since the water level in the Mississippi River has gone up, the ship has once more gone into obscurity. It's still right there near the Poplar Street Bridge, just hidden underwater. Destroyed bomber. A destroyed bomber aircraft from World War II was found off the coast of Croatia. It wasn't the first time one of these warbirds were discovered in the area. There are thousands of sunken vehicles from the war all throughout the Adriatic Sea, including planes and boats. On the island of Vis, there was a very busy Allied airport in 1944. It had only a single runway. Sometimes it was so busy that planes waiting to land would run out of fuel and simply drop into the ocean. Around Vis's old airport, at least 30 aircraft have been found through the years. In 2009, a diver came across the remains of a severely damaged B-24 heavy bomber. With help from the Croatian Conservation Institute, researchers were able to properly identify the plane. They now know it successfully completed 27 assignments before falling near the airport in Vis in 1944. 7 of the crew members were rescued, but the remaining 3 unfortunately perished. We may not know what kind of brave or courageous things these pilots did in the war, but they were undoubtedly still heroes. Shortly after this wreckage was discovered, the same divers found yet another B-24 heavy bomber in the same area. This one was sitting at a depth of around 300 feet. The divers almost missed it because of the poor visibility at such depth. They haven't been able to identify it yet or find out anything about its history, but it goes to show just how many planes are still lost in European waters. The Caracat. The Caracat was built long before World War II ever broke out, back in 1894. It was constructed in Belfast, Northern Ireland. When the ship first set sail, she was a passenger steamer that helped deliver British mail. Her name then was the Guelph, but it was changed to the Caracat in 1913 when the vessel was handed over to the Royal Steam Packet Company. Just 10 years later, on June 25, 1923, the vessel sank. She was en route from the British Virgin Islands to Halifax when she encountered rough seas and hit the northern barrier reef of Bermuda near Fort St. Catherine. There wasn't much that could be done to salvage the ship, and efforts weren't made in earnest until World War II broke out. Suddenly, copper and metal were in high demand. A crew was sent over to the vessel to rip apart coils, propellers, conductors, and anything else made of copper, brass, or bronze. Anything of value that could be removed was taken from the ship. These days, the wreckage of the Caracat is strewn over an area of prime underwater real estate in about 45 feet of water. Divers have found the ship's engines sitting on the sea floor, some giant boilers, 2 large deck winches, and the ship's impossibly huge anchor lying on one side. Dumped military equipment. Divers in the Pacific Ocean have discovered tons of expensive military equipment that was discarded after the US finished up with Japan in World War II. These incredible discoveries were made in the waters of Vanuatu, where it was apparently cheaper to dump equipment than to transport it back home to American soil. Divers managed to photograph jeeps, bulldozers, forklifts, and even tractors. All kinds of heavy machinery needed for the war effort was abandoned here, dumped at a place called $1 Million Point. The name is appropriate, considering how much money was thrown away here. It's impossible to say exactly what all this equipment together must have been worth in the 1940s, but it was probably over $1 million. The US had 2 military bases in the Vanuatu Islands, Buttons and Roses. They had even conscripted the island natives to help them build the bases, which they used as their headquarters for attacking the Japanese. When the US left, they tried to make the locals buy the equipment. But understandably, the peaceful fishermen wanted nothing to do with such things. And besides, they didn't have millions of dollars for tractors. So instead of doing something nice and charitable to the people that helped build their military bases, the US Army dumped their valuable equipment into the water. If the islanders wouldn't pay for it, nobody could have it. What are your thoughts on the US Army dumping so much valuable equipment into the water? Does this surprise you at all? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. We've got lots more videos coming up. Sunken assault rifle. A pair of friends in Holland used magnet fishing rods to look for artifacts and historical relics left behind throughout Europe's grand history. Recently, the pair discovered a sunken assault rifle left behind from World War II. But this was hardly their first piece of military equipment. These guys, both residents of the Netherlands, have already found plenty of machine guns, rifles, hand grenades, and too many dog tags to count. The one reason this particular assault rifle proved so interesting is that it's a Sturmgewehr 44, one of the very first of its kind ever built. The Sturmgewehr 44 was the very first widely distributed assault rifle in the world. It was designed with the ammunition capacity of a submachine gun, yet it fired bullets that would normally come from a rifle. The weapon was used by the German army and was the original inspiration for the Soviet AK-47 and the US M16. The Germans may have been the enemy in the war, but they really did create some of the most innovative and devastating weapons. Just about every assault rifle today came from this original model. Nobody knows how the gun wound up underwater. The Netherlands hosted some pretty fierce fighting at the beginning of the war when Germany invaded in 1940. Then, during the Allied liberation in 1944, they experienced even more battle. Considering the Netherlands is a nation of rivers, canals, and ponds, it's no surprise that some weapons have ended up buried in local waters. The lost Enigma machine. German divers discovered an encryption machine known as an Enigma device at the bottom of the Baltic Sea. These incredible machines were used by Nazis during World War II to send coded messages from one place to another. The Enigma machines were so complex that Allied scientists had no clue what to make of them. Because of their complexity, Enigma machines allowed the enemy to send messages freely without too much worry about sensitive material being intercepted and translated. At least, the Germans didn't have to think about it for a few years. In 1941, British mathematician Alan Turing finally cracked the code and figured out how the machines worked, allowing the Allies to use German messages to their own advantage. Historians have estimated the war was cut short by at least 2 years, thanks to Alan and his impressive math skills. But what was this machine doing at the bottom of the ocean? Divers hadn't even been looking for artifacts. They were searching for abandoned fishing nets when they came across the machine. At first, lead diver Florian Huber thought he had discovered a typewriter, but it turned out to be a real historical artifact, probably thrown overboard in the last days of the war. When the Germans realized defeat was imminent, warships and submarines started dumping their code machines into the water to get rid of any evidence of what kinds of evils they'd been up to. The SS Richard Montgomery. The SS Richard Montgomery has been rusting underwater for nearly 8 decades. All that you can see of this strange, abandoned shipwreck today are a trio of masts sticking out of the water. The ship ran aground back in August of 1944 with a cargo of explosives. And guess what? The submerged wreckage still has over 1,400 tons of TNT sitting in its hold, and it's less than 1 mile from land. The ship is currently at the bottom of the Thames estuary, close enough that folks in the nearby city would see the explosion, but probably far enough away that it wouldn't do much damage. At least that's what the government hopes. There are high explosive bombs, fragmentation bombs, cluster bombs, explosive booster charges, smoke bombs, and pyrotechnic signals. There are enough explosives here for a fireworks festival. There is an exclusion zone around the wreckage prohibiting people from going near it just in case it blows. But as of right now, nobody has dared go in and take out the bombs. Chances are the fuses have already been flooded and the explosives are inert, but you just never know. Lost gold. Did you know that there is roughly $4.5 to $5 billion worth of gold hiding at the bottom of the sea going back to World War I? During the First and Second World Wars, over 7,500 British merchant ships were sunk. At least 700 of them were official gold carriers, meaning they were shipping full cargoes of gold from one part of the globe to another to pay for supplies and munitions. While much of this gold has been lost forever and will probably never be recovered, research teams have found some of it. Researchers from the UK, the US, and Canada have spent the last 25 years trying to track down lost British gold. By going through over 8,000 documents and using the newest technology to scan the ocean floors, researchers with an organization called Britannia's Gold have been tracking down wreck sites. They haven't actually pulled any gold up from the bottom of the ocean, but they are trying to get some salvage missions going. For example, they discovered the location of the city of Benares, a British liner destroyed by German torpedoes in 1940. The ship was carrying 262 evacuees to Canada when it was targeted by the enemy. But it wasn't just full of civilians, it was also full of hidden gold stashed there by the government. The team at Britannia's Gold can't actually touch this sunken ship, as it's considered a war grave. But still, it's a great example of just how much lost gold there is sitting at the bottom of the sea. What would you do if you could get your hands on sunken World War II treasure? Would you give it to a museum or keep it for yourself? Let me know in the comments below. Underwater winery. In mid-2021, a group of researchers found an ancient Roman ship wrecked off the island of Ustica, which is located north of Sicily. It rests at a depth of around 230 feet. Using a submarine robot, the team noticed that the ship was carrying a huge number of large jars the Romans used to transport wine and other goods, known as amphorae. Just weeks after, scientists announced the discovery of another ancient Roman ship off the coast of Palermo, Sicily. Dating back to the 2nd century BC, the vessel sits over 300 feet beneath the waves, and it was also carrying many, many vessels of wine.
And these are just two of many Roman shipwrecks that have been found. Based on this incredible history, a company has decided to install an underwater winery inside a wrecked ship in the Adriatic Sea. Because why not? If you love wine and you love history, then this is the place for you. This incredible winery was made near the town of Dres, Croatia, about 1 hour from the famous ancient city of Dubrovnik. The Edivovina winery, as it's been named, was created with adventurous scuba divers in mind. It's the only winery in the world where you have to pick out your own submerged jug while breathing underwater. Though, of course, there is also a winery on flat ground for those who don't want to go through the trouble of putting on a scuba suit. The winery is complete with underwater cellars, wine stored in bottles and housed in a sunken fishing boat that's been sitting at the bottom of the bay for over 30 years. 5,000 bottles of wine annually are aged above the ground for 3 months before being put under the waves in the special amphorae. What's really cool about this is that the vessels they use are imitating the traditional clay jugs used by the ancient Greeks and Romans. People don't really use them anymore, but the underwater winery in Croatia is bringing them back. In case you were wondering how they keep underwater jugs of wine safe, they use padlocked cages. If you were thinking of sneaking into the bay and getting yourself some free wine, you're going to need to learn how to pick locks while scuba diving like an aquatic MacGyver. Are you down to check this place out? Japanese F-35 fighter jet. The day after it disappeared from radar over the Pacific Ocean, the wreckage of a Japanese F-35 fighter jet was found at sea, or at least parts of the plane were found at sea. The rest was at the bottom of the ocean. Nobody knows for sure why the plane lost contact and crashed. Following the incident, the remainder of the Japanese stealth fighters were grounded, pending investigation. And to make things truly tragic, the man who was piloting the stealth fighter is still missing. Seeing as this happened just recently in 2019, he may never be found. The trouble started around 7 o'clock at night on a Tuesday. The fighter jet was flying 84 miles east of Misawa in Japan. 30 minutes after taking off, it lost all contact with the Misawa air base. The missing pilot sent a signal to abort the mission, but nobody knows why or what happened. The only confirmation of a crash came from a few pieces of the fighter's tail fin fished out of the water. The 40-something-year-old pilot is MIA, and the aircraft itself is in pieces at the bottom of the sea. It was the second time in the history of the F-35 that one of them crashed. Lost Kyrgyz civilization. In the country of Kyrgyzstan, an international team of archaeologists discovered the existence of an advanced civilization at the bottom of a lake. These archaeologists went on an expedition to Lake Issyk-Kul, located high up in the Kyrgyz mountains. The mysterious civilization lived here around 2,500 years ago. And according to the team's findings, their civilization was just as advanced as those in what is today Greece, and even the prospering societies along the Mediterranean coast. Here's what they found beneath the lake. The archaeologists uncovered the remains of a major settlement buried under the water. They found artifacts, crumbling city walls, burial mounds from the ancient Scythians that have been eroded by centuries of waves, arrowheads, daggers, gold bars, and even bronze battle axes. Judging by the formidable outer walls, some of them still stretching for over 1,500 feet, this was an enormous city for its time. And judging by the sheer number of artifacts and weaponry, it was one that could easily defend itself. The reason it ended up submerged has to do with the lake itself. Scientists know that the lake regularly shifts its water level. Sometimes it's full, sometimes there's not a drop of water in it. But these changes are gradual, happening over a span of several hundred years. What this means is that 25 centuries ago, the lake was dry. An unknown civilization moved in, built an amazing city, and then came the water. They were forced to abandon the city as their houses flooded, and they were driven out by the mighty force of Mother Nature herself. The ghost town of Vilarinho da Furna. Vilarinho da Furna is a ghost town in Portugal, completely submerged underwater. It was once one of the most charming villages found at the Kyrgyz National Park, but in 1967, the construction of a dam caused the entire area to flood so that hydroelectricity could be brought to the region. There were some protests, but it didn't do the townsfolk much good.
The Portuguese electric company finally forced residents out of their homes just before the completion of the dam that submerged their small village. Within just one short year, all residents were gone, and over 2,000 years of history and culture were lost. Today, the forgotten ghost town reappears from the water on the hottest summer days. When levels in the reservoir drop sufficiently, the shattered walls and crumbling door frames of what was once a quaint village reveal themselves. It's only happened a handful of times in the last 40 years. In recent days, the history of Vilarinho da Furna has been safeguarded in a nearby museum, a museum dedicated to what the locals refer to as the Portuguese Atlantis. Lost Egyptian shipwrecks. In Egypt, 3 Roman-era shipwrecks have been discovered off the coast of the city of Alexandria. According to the Egyptian Antiquities Authority, divers also discovered a crystal carving of some unidentified Roman's head, some gold coins from the days of the Emperor Augustus, and an idol dedicated to the god Osiris. For those who don't know, the waters near Alexandria are bursting with sunken treasures from the ancient world. Neighborhoods and entire cities were submerged because of rising sea levels and earthquakes thousands of years ago, leaving much to be discovered in modern times. In fact, before the city of Alexandria even existed, there was a port city named Heraklion, which is currently under several feet of water. Expeditions have found shrines to Egyptian gods here, statues of pharaohs nearly 20 feet tall, and even animal imprints fossilized in the soil on the seabed. This place is a gold mine of ancient Egyptian treasure. As for the shipwrecks, it's impossible to say too much about them. There wasn't actually much left, with divers only discovering a handful of wooden planks and pieces of pottery to suggest they had even been there at all. The experts believe there were at least 3 ships in this one spot, but it could have been 4. In all likelihood, they were transporting goods between Egypt and some other place in the Mediterranean when they were struck by a tidal wave or other natural disaster. Underwater plane. There is a mystery surrounding an underwater plane that's been spotted off the coast of Scotland, thanks to Google Maps. According to a report in The Scotsman, experts are scratching their heads over the image of a very clear airplane sitting at the bottom of the sea, less than a mile from Edinburgh. The discovery was made by a man named Robert Morton, who was so excited by what he found that he reached out to some local professionals. He wasn't even looking for anything when he made the discovery. He was simply browsing on Google Earth when his eagle eyes spotted the shape of the aircraft, and he zoomed in to investigate. What the satellite imagery suggests is that an aircraft crashed after leaving Edinburgh. The problem is that there are no records of this ever happening. It could be a Google glitch, a ghostly airplane that never actually existed. Or there really could be a mysterious plane sitting just off the coast that no one has ever heard of before. So far, nobody has been able to explain the mystery or identify the lost vehicle, if indeed it is a lost vehicle at all, and not a flaw in the Matrix. The ruins of an ancient warship. Inside the ruins of an ancient warship submerged off the coast of Sicily, scientists have found over 100 animal species. These animals are living inside the 2,000-year-old wreckage as if it's their own party boat. These remains are of a ship that sank during a dramatic battle between the Romans and the Carthaginians. The best guess historians have is that it sank on March 10, 241 BC. This was the day of an epic sea battle near the Aegean Islands. A fleet of ships from the Roman Republic faced off against an equally impressive fleet from Carthage, but Rome got the upper hand and completely wiped out their enemy, putting an end to the First Punic War. And while you might expect the wreckage of a boat with such a violent history to be creepy and lifeless, it's not really. Italian researchers found approximately 114 marine animal species existing together in harmony inside the remains of the ship. These life forms include different kinds of snails, slugs, worms, and mollusks, and of course, all the different species of fish that occasionally pass through the boat. It's an underwater sanctuary the likes of which you would expect to see in The Little Mermaid. Only this sanctuary is 300 feet deep, in the middle of the long stretch of water separating Europe and North Africa. Flight MH370. A man on the internet believes that he has discovered the truth behind what happened with flight MH370, or Malaysia Airlines flight MH370. And while that's a pretty crackpot thing to say, this guy has actually been investigating the incident for 7 years. He has devoted a large chunk of his time to cracking the case. He believes that the airplane is currently sitting 12,000 feet below the surface of the water in the Indian Ocean, over 1,000 miles from Australia. The flight departed from Kuala Lumpur on its way to Beijing when it vanished seemingly into thin air. It was carrying 239 people. Despite extensive search efforts and years of speculation, its fate has remained a mystery. But Richard Godfrey, a British aerospace engineer, says he's found the crash site. He used revolutionary tracking technology, a system called weak signal propagation, to pinpoint the plane's location in the Indian Ocean. He recently told reporters that he's positive it's at this exact location. Sadly, there is really no way to find the airplane unless somebody uses a remotely operated vehicle to dive into the darkness. And if Godfrey's new tracking methods prove wrong, somebody would be out a whole lot of money. So while the plane could be down there right now, it's too big of a risk for anyone to take on. Lost Canadian villages. There are 9 lost Canadian villages that were destroyed during construction of the St. Lawrence Seaway in the 1950s. All 9 of the communities were located along the northern shore of the St. Lawrence River. The communities were incredibly old, going all the way back to 1784, following the American War of Independence. Even in the 1950s, these remote settlements were primarily populated by the descendants of disbanded soldiers from the King's Royal Regiment of New York. In fact, it was Captain Jeremiah French who received one of the very first land grants from King George III, a piece of land that would turn into the town of Maple Grove. In other words, this settlement had a deep and rich history, at least until the Seaway project. It's a story we've all heard before. The project would create a huge artificial lake to be used for hydroelectric power. But the creation of the lake would mean relocating old highways and rail lines, as well as 6,500 people. The 9 lost Canadian villages were entirely wiped out by the water, flooded, and every last resident forced to move away. Nobody has seen these villages since July 1st, 1958. They are still hiding beneath the water, just waiting to be explored. And as a final slap in the face for residents who got booted out of their houses, the Seaway project never saw the return it was hoping for. One of the nearby villages in the 1950s boasted 1,036 residents. The project was supposed to cause a huge population boom with an increase in the economy to match. But as of 2011, the population had only grown by just 103 people. Wonder how it's doing now. Rare World War II submarine. Greek divers have discovered a very rare submarine from World War II that sank after being torpedoed by the Royal Navy. The submarine is an Italian one, destroyed roughly 80 years ago by the Allied forces in the Aegean Sea in the midst of World War II. The submarine, called the Jantina, had just left the Greek island of Leros with 48 sailors when the British made their move. On July 5, 1941, the British submarine HMS Torbay hit the other submarine with a barrage of torpedoes, sending it to the murky depths below. Now, for the first time, a human has seen the wreckage with their own eyes. Famous Greek diver Kostas Thoktaridis used an ROV, or a remote operating vehicle, to see the thing for himself, diving down to a depth of about 300 feet below sea level. He didn't dive all the way down on his own, but used a special piece of technology called Super Achille to inspect the wreckage. And believe it or not, it was the 4th submarine located and properly identified by Kostas. He's a certifiable submarine hunter. According to him, it's all because of his love for maritime history. He's even written 6 books, one of them called Shipwrecks on the Greek Seabed, that goes into detail on 20 of the most famous shipwrecks ever discovered off the coast of Greece. Thanks for watching! What's the craziest thing you've ever discovered underwater? Let me know in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. See you soon! Bye!